And so, like, for me, thinking of this from a cultural anthropology perspective, it's not just about what folks are doing, but why are they doing it? And I think that we need to understand the role of the community organizer and organizations to really understand why this funding needs to be going into these spaces. These areas are places of incubation, and it's a place to help us as community members understand our role, understand our power, and understand our responsibility to each other. And so, we have this idea that if we just get these folks who are harming us to understand that they're harming us, they will stop harming us. We have to recognize the power in educating ourselves and the power that we've had as agents of transformation throughout history. And so, really, that radical political education, not to say that everyone couldn't benefit from it, but to focus on educating the oppressor and ignore the ways that oppressed groups, can really mobilize themselves through their own political re-education is just, it's just really putting all the energy in one space when we have way more that we can give to this conversation.
I mean, certainly, I know I was talking about education, but you're talking about education too. So if you're talking about educating the community and reminding them of their power, for sure. But I guess we have to bring in some of what Professor Vitale was saying, that this conversation has to be more general across the country. Somehow this has to be part of the overall conversation. And I do obviously agree that right now, it's something that everybody is talking about. People are trying to think about it. Never seen this much coverage of issues, for example, of Frederick Douglass's speech about what does July 4th mean to me. I've never seen that much general coverage of that concept. The whole bringing down monuments, statues, people demonstrating all over the country in an effort to change the narrative. So while we're changing the narrative, what is the narrative that we're working on changing, and how can we continue the change of the narrative? So I guess right now I'm also struck when we're talking about how change happens, that, for example, with the huddle group that I'm a part of, the women of the huddle group came together after the 2017 Women's March. And women have been working on just since the 70s, the concept of what does women's liberation mean? How would it shape? How should we feel? And some of the people that are were there at the beginning of the quote unquote women's liberation movement, second wave feminism, are still alive. We're here. We're still thinking about it. We're still working towards various goals. So, and part of that happened through groups of people discussing, consciousness raising groups. So is this what we're doing now? Are we in the process of consciousness raising on the issue of policing and changing the nature of policing? I know, Alex, you're on a lot of television programs. You are talking at high level. So is Professor Joseph. Is that what we need to do, or what more? What more do we need to be doing right now?
Well, this can't be understood as just a question of policing. I mean, when we look back at the liberation struggles, the uprisings, the movements of the 1960s and 70s, while many protests and riots were triggered by bad policing, we don't think that those were movements just about policing. And the same has to be understood today. I think this is not just about revisiting the history, which is terribly important. And I think Brian Stevenson and his effort along these lines is tremendously important. I think we've got to articulate a set of demands for racial justice. The kind of some of the stuff that Dr. Joseph brought in about, we have to have a real conversation about reparations, but also about preventing the current ongoing harms that are occurring that are making racial inequality worse in the United States. I mean, the way, for instance, that education funding is organized in the United States based on very local property taxes, I think may be one of the primary engines for reproducing racial inequality in the United States. And this is a bipartisan problem. We have politicians riding to election with a lot of Black votes who continue to put this system in place. Governor Cuomo in New York is one of the worst offenders in this regard. And so I think we've got to go a lot further than saying, well, we need to support our Black entrepreneurs, right? We need to have real conversations about national access to high quality health insurance, creating a minimum income, as Dr. Joseph mentioned, and a whole set of fundamental reforms. And then we've got to build a multiracial majoritarian politics behind this and link these issues to rural communities that are hurting, that have been defunded, that have widespread unemployment and opioid overdoses, right? We are all losing, not we're all, but there are a majority of people who are on the losing end of these arrangements, and we need to try and find common cause.
Yes, 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 because the majority are losing all across the board.
And I remember when I was taking your class, I had actually asked you, you were talking about social movements and like the possibility of forget about reform, which I've never been for, but completely just gutting this entire system and just doing away with it. And I was like, well, at what point are people willing to give up all of the comforts that they have in order to see the change that we want? And you were saying when you were saying that, you know, people who have children, people who have stable jobs, you know, even if you're just comfortable having your Wi-Fi and your AC in your house, you know, you don't want to give up the safety and security that you have. And so the point that you'll be willing to come outside and take to the streets and do whatever is necessary to overthrow a government, to completely turn a system on its head, you will need to no longer be able to afford to stay home. The lives of your children and everything you've worked for have to be at risk for you to be willing to come outside and do what needs to be done. And I think about that, you know, fairly often. You know, and I think about the ways that, you know, we might say we want to see change and Black Lives Matter and this, that, and the third, and yet are so unwilling to let go of our comforts and let go of the things that make us feel safe, such as policing. You know, like this earlier idea of like, you know, if we get rid of police, what then? You have to let go of this false belief that having the police in the first place was ever helping you. You know,
Absolutely.
you have to let go of that and consider that maybe there is something more that we can do for ourselves, you know, and like this parental relationship that we have to the state and to police, you know, and it's not working, you know, so it just, I think about that often.
Yeah, people have a stake in conformity, you know. They think they can carve out their little deals and continue this system with little, you know, cosmetic changes around the edges. And so, you know, one of the things that's exciting about the moment that we're in right now, and also terrifying, right, is that there's so many people now who've been left out of the economy, whose health and actual survival has been put at risk. And I think that's part of what's motivating the intensity of this movement is just how few people increasingly feel like this system really works for them. And that part of the challenge is articulating what a credible alternative would look like. And that's where this issue of community organizing and political education really are so essential.
So while we're talking about the effects of reform that have not worked, can you be perhaps a little bit more specific about how it is that what people thought would be good reforms 5, 10 years ago of body cams, sensitivity training, hiring officers from the community, a quote unquote diversity hirings of the police? Why have those not worked? I mean, is there a short answer to why?
Yeah, well, right. Because they can't work. It's not possible that they could work. They haven't worked. And the reason they can't work is that they misunderstand the nature of the problem. These are mostly what we think of as procedural justice reforms that are designed to make police more professional, less biased, and more transparent. And it assumes that you can have a kind of just policing if the police just follow the rules properly. And what this misses is the fact that the law, even as written and properly enforced, does not benefit everyone equally. That's certainly not been true historically, and it's not true today. I mean, just look at the way the war on drugs has been constructed. That legal framework was designed to produce racial inequality. We know this because folks in the Nixon administration have come public who were part of the decision to create the federal war on drugs and said this was about attacking our political enemies and about appealing to historically democratic white voters in the South in the wake of the advances of the civil rights movement. It's a rancid politics of race that doesn't make anyone safer, doesn't save any lives, and giving narcotics units anti-bias training will do nothing to change this. We have to get rid of the war on drugs, just like the neutral, proper professional enforcement of Jim Crow laws or the laws of slavery didn't do anything to change the substantive injustice of those legal frameworks.
How can the police demilitarize? How is that? Simply, it's the defunding that will lead to the demilitarization?
So, reducing armaments, getting rid of federal weapons transfers, reducing the number of SWAT teams, all of these are important, but there's a deeper sense in which policing has become militarized. Part of it's about a pervasive culture of training, but also when our elected officials tell police to wage a war on drugs and a war on crime and a war on gangs and a war on illegal immigrants and a war on terror, they're going to be on a war footing. This is a political problem. It's about turning every problem under the sun over to the police to manage. And then when they fail in that effort, then they just up the ante with ever more intensive, invasive, and violent interventions. So we've got to get the politicians to get rid of these wars. And then we can start to rethink how we manage the social problems that we have left.
Thank you so much, Professor Vitale, for your remarks. I mean, your both deep and vast understanding of the problems that we're facing right now with policing have added so much to this discussion. And I want to thank you really for your contributions this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Well, you're most welcome, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you in person at Brooklyn College before too much longer.
We'll see.